Amy Quinn is our speaker this morning. She's the founder of A Traveling Time, a well-being consultancy. She brings her facilitation, speaking, coaching, and creative skills to the travel and wellness industries, providing wellness workshops, mindfulness workshops, retreats, travel services, and an active blog. She's also a certified teacher of the Global Search Inside Yourself program. She's published 2 books. She holds a master's in business administration from the Thunderbird School of Management at ASU and a Bachelor of Arts in International Relations and German from Bucknell University. Welcome, Amy. We're so glad to have you with us this morning.
Thank you so much, Claire. I'm going to just have a quick question, Joe. I don't see the gallery. I don't know what happened to the gallery, and so I don't see any of you, which is a little bit strange. Do you have any suggestions on that, Joe, before I continue?
Can you change from speaker view to gallery view in your top right corner?
Well, with my screen share, I don't.
Probably the screen share then.
Have that.
Yeah.
So, Claire, you'll do a little quarterbacking. If people are waving, let me know.
Okay, we'll do.
It's kind of strange that I lost that, but either way, welcome. I'm really thrilled to be here. And let me just give you a little bit of background. Question for you. How difficult has it been to connect online or during the social distancing time, right? Has it been, just give a wave. Or how many of you have ever had a difficult conversation at work with clients, with partners, or even at home with family and friends where it wasn't easy to be very empathetic? It was a very hard conversation. Just give a wave. Well, I actually went into training in emotional intelligence when I had a small business called A Table and Time. It was a business for facilitating conversation around the table, often around the meal. And particularly in 2016, I found that people just weren't able to listen and they really weren't connecting. It was obviously a very fervid time. But the other thing I noticed is that people just, they weren't aware of themselves. They weren't aware of how they were showing up. And that really led me into training around emotional intelligence and how can it be that we can show up as our best selves and actually hear. It's obviously sometimes very difficult managing our emotions and our feelings currently, especially when it's with a difficult someone who we just find difficult, for example. And then I also went into meditation. I had a serious illness many years ago now, but I sat in this tube routinely every quarter for 5 years, getting these x-rays, and they were very loud. And I just started focusing on my breath, and that's really what led me to meditation. So today we're going to look at self-awareness and empathy, and these are 2 domains of emotional intelligence. I'll give you some background, what they mean, some of the science, as well as some skills on how to really bring them more into your life. And what I hope you leave with most of all is an understanding of the importance of connecting to one another, to actually what that feeling is, to feel connected to someone, regardless of circumstances, regardless of differences. As humans, we're meant to be connected. That's a little bit about me. So let me just move this over here. What is emotional intelligence? Well, first of all, that term has been in the vernacular since 1989, and it was popularized by a book by Daniel Goleman. I don't know if anyone's seen this book, but he really brought it into, our population. And if you notice, there's 2 sides to this. There's self-awareness and self-management. Those are both foundational. In other words, it starts with ourselves. And then social awareness, which is really empathy, and then relationship management, which brings it all together. And there was a study that was done by some Harvard researchers on looking at leadership, and what they looked at over 300,000 leaders, managers, and they found that 6 of the 8 kind of top leadership traits were emotional intelligence traits. yes, IQ is important, but it's not obviously all that you know, really. And the other thing I wanted to say is, although this study was about leaders, how we show up every day, we are all leaders in how we show up every day in our families, in our work, in our relationships. So whether you have a title or not, having self-awareness and social awareness affects what your relationships are going to be like. So why is emotional intelligence so important? Well, I actually think it's more important now more than ever. On an individual level, so many distractions, right? We've had to figure out how to actually be productive online. You turn on the news, it's devastating often. So it takes us away, right? It really takes us away from knowing what's really important to us and how we want to show up. And on a societal level, there's a term, it's a military term called VUCA. And unfortunately, really it has rung true lately. I wish it wasn't so. But this is why being able to have this awareness about ourselves is so, so important, because things are volatile. We're living with uncertainty right now. Things are complex. Can you relate? I'm sure you all can, right? It's a VUCA world. So there's a researcher named Matt Killingsworth, and he looked into what made people happy, and he did a study, and on top of a VUCA world, 47% of the time, our minds are wandering. And in fact, it doesn't lead to a lot of happiness. Further, 70% of the time, leaders report regularly being unable to be attentive at meetings. Now, this impacts us, right? If our leader or someone leading a meeting isn't engaged with us, that's going to have an impact. And only 2% of us regularly make time to enhance kind of our personal productivity, our awareness of how we manage this mind wandering. Now, I think probably up in the mountains, you guys are exceptional, and you probably have some practices for managing this more than others. You're surrounded by beauty, but nevertheless, mind wandering means that we're on autopilot. We're not conscious. We're not living on purpose. Now, I do want to say that I think we've witnessed recently with the protests of people actually, their consciousness being awakened, where we've gotten off of autopilot. But typically, really 47% of the time or more, we are on autopilot. Our attention is in the past, it's in the future. We're distracted, maybe we have kids at home, we're not as aware, and we act based just on our habit patterns, not necessarily based on what we know to be true. We just go to the default. Yet we know that autopilot isn't the only way to be, right? We've just witnessed it. And we've probably all had some experiences. Maybe it's when you've gone for a hike. Maybe it's just you've taken a look at the mountains and suddenly you're very, very aware and you feel aligned in yourself. And you found this space. So between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is your power to choose your response. And in that response is where the growth and the freedom is. So let's just take a moment, just pause. I want you to consider, what have been the circumstances when you have found this space? How have you gotten off of autopilot? It's not always easy. Sometimes we're aware that that's happening. Sometimes we're aware that we're totally just reacting. It's a practice. It takes practice to move from autopilot to aware. So self-awareness really is a very simple definition. from mindfulness is the movement from autopilot to aware. Again, mindfulness is the movement from autopilot to aware. That's what self-awareness is. The movement from autopilot to aware. Knowing one's internal states, preferences and resources and intuitions. That's how Daniel Goleman defines it. Discernment, really having clarity around those internal states. And it's crucial. It's crucial for self-awareness in our relationships. It's crucial for empathy. We can't be empathetic if we don't have any awareness of ourselves, and if we can't manage ourselves and have clarity and discernment of what is going on with ourselves. So this is a practice called 3 breaths. It's a micro practice. It's one that we can use in the moment. That's what I mean by integrative practice. And it works like this. And literally you could be walking down the hallway. You have a half a second. It could be before a phone call, or you were triggered, or you're preparing for something. And how it works is you take 3 breaths. On the first breath, we're going to practice it, but let me go over it. On the first breath, you bring your attention to the breath. On your second breath, you just really feel that breath in your body. And on the third breath, you ask, what's important now? Now, it's something really you can do with your eyes open. Honestly, it's again for when you're active, when you're out in the world. It could be when you're at a stop site or you're in your car. Okay? So I'd love everyone to try it right now, and I'm going to try to find you. I don't know why I can't see you. But let's take 3 breaths and go ahead and try it. How was that? So when we use our breath is always with us, right? So this is always available for you to take 3 breaths. But it's like a snow globe. You shake it. And on those 3 breaths, that snow settles. It allows our minds to settle. Just going to go up to see if I can find you guys. I don't have that window anymore on the upper right. Okay.
Amy, if
Yes.
you go to view options,
Yeah, I don't.
Go to split screen. Should be right next to where it says your green sharing screen up at the top in the middle.
Yeah. Thank you for getting on with me. No, it doesn't. I don't have that here. Let me just stop sharing for a moment. And here we go. Hey everyone, and let me go back to sharing my screen. Okay. No, everyone has left me again. Either way, it's okay. So let me give you a little recap. And actually, why don't you enter in the chat? In the meantime, let me bring my chat back up. How was the 3 breaths practice? Let's have 2 people share about that practice, and when do you think you might be able to use it? Okay, let's bring that up. And what will happen is go down to the participant in the bar and click on that bar, and Claire will unmute you. And the question is, I'd really like to know, when do you think you might be able to use the 3 breaths practice? And how was it just to take 3 breaths in that way? Would anyone be willing to share? You go down into the participant and raise your hand. So you click on your name and you raise your hand, and Claire will unmute you. Is anyone willing to share? Claire or Lauren, how was that 3 breaths for you?
I can see where that would be really helpful in a split moment. For instance, when I was driving in this morning, I looked at my rearview mirror and the person behind me was driving like this. And, I'm ahead of them, so I didn't have to worry about them hitting me, but I did worry about them hitting somebody else or hurting themselves. And it's
Right.
in those moments where I think it's helpful to take a breath and not let your emotions get the better of you.
Take over. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then to remind yourself what's most important in that moment, obviously it was focusing on the road and not being distracted by that driver. I believe there was another raised hand there. Thank you so much, Claire, for sharing that. And I believe Eric's hand is raised.
I did raise my hand, and I really like this process of 3 breaths. And a long time ago, someone who's a mentor to me gave me a great place to use that. Whenever I sit in my vehicle and I'm about to drive somewhere, that was his plan. It was an old pastor who did that as part of his sermon. So I sit in the vehicle, I put the key into the ignition, and then that's when I take my breaths, because we all do that. We all have that moment of time. And sometimes we need a little peace before we get on the road.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much, Eric. And it's amazing how it is always available. And I would say if you did like nothing else, if you didn't have a practice, but you started to incorporate this in, like let's just say you're in your office and maybe you're in your home office and you have family or your spouse or you're going to see friends, good time to take 3 breaths is at the end of the workday as you transition into something else. So thanks for sharing that, Eric. Or before you write an email that maybe is a tough one to write, or before a difficult conversation, or even before a party, or even before a social gathering, and especially now as we get back out into the world, asking yourself, how do you want to show up? How will you manage any discomfort that you come across, right? Be real clear on what's important and how you want to show up, because again, we're all leaders and having that alignment. So thank you so much. Is everyone muted again? Okay. So just to recap on self-awareness is that we have these 3 breaths practice. It's available all the time. A dedicated practice. This is where you're sitting on a cushion. There are lots of apps you can try. And even as you saw, literally we sat for less than 3 minutes. And it did bring some calm. And we use your breath because your breath is always with you. It's one form of meditation called a focused attention. Insight Timer is a really great app, but there's others out there. It's okay if thoughts come in as you meditate. It's part of the practice, and just noticing them. So know that's just something that's there for you. And there's no such thing as a good or bad meditator. I think anytime you try it out, it's just be kind to yourself. Like, wow, it's not an easy thing to do. So we have 3 breaths, we have focused attention, and I would love for you to put in the chat, because I think you live in a beautiful place. Some of you have already meditated. What else? Put in the chat, what else might you do or do you do already to just bring some self-awareness to a situation and to how you're feeling? Is there anything else that you do? Anything else? Here you are. Anything else? Focus on sounds. Yes, thanks, Joe. And that's really important, especially for sometimes it's hard to focus on the breath. Taking a moment outside in nature. Exactly. Putting a pot of tea on. How about journaling? Does anyone journal? And again, journaling doesn't have to be this big regular thing you do for 20 minutes. It could be for 1 minute. You set your timer and you ask yourself what's most important, or how am I feeling? When I'm talking to someone, I remind myself that they are the most important person in the world in that moment. That's really lovely, Claire. Katie, drink some water. Yeah, really noticing the water going down your throat. One other thought I had was also mindful eating. That's a practice as well. Movement. Yeah, thank you. Watching yourself move. So thanks so much. These are all really great self-awareness practices. And as I said, self-awareness is foundational. We start with ourselves, and it affects how we show up in our relationships. So we need these self-awareness skills, particularly in this VUCA post-COVID-19 world. And it helps us just manage challenging situations with peers. And it leads to empathy. Self-awareness leads to empathy. So now we're going to go, let me just take a time check. We're going to go into empathy right now. That's social awareness. And empathy is a feeling with. That's how Brene Brown likes to define it. It's a feeling with. And there's a quote I have from a Pakistani author named Mazin Hamid. Empathy is about finding echoes of another person in yourself. Empathy is about finding echoes of another person in yourself. So let's take a poll. What I have found when talking to groups about empathy is that some people feel like they're very empathetic, almost too empathetic, and they get kind of walked all over because they're so kind and they're so empathetic. Others feel like, sometimes there is a situation where empathy is not really what I think about because I have to deliver some, bad news, or it just doesn't apply to the situation. So I don't really consider empathy. We'd like to know, which side are you on? And Joe, can you post that poll? There we go. So go ahead now and let's see how you guys are feeling about empathy. Are you overly empathetic? I don't feel much empathy. I'm comfortable. Okay. So it looks like the majority of you are feeling like you have the right amount of empathy. A small percentage of you say that you're not empathetic. And then some of you are feeling like, oh gosh, I'm too empathetic. Okay. Well, let's see what Brene Brown has to say. Let's see, let's stop sharing that. Can we get this off this share off the screen here? Get that out of there. Okay. So we're going to listen to a video here, and I have to make sure I activate my sound. 1 second. And let's see, can we share computer sound? And in this video, I want you to notice the difference between empathy and sympathy. And it's Brene Brown, and she has basically, what I want has said that in this video, empathy fuels connection.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So clearly, empathy fuels connection. It would be also really good for you to know that empathy is crucial for teamwork. So Google did a study not too long ago on what makes the best team. And they looked at over 180 teams. And of course, they were looking for, well, it's the right combination of skills, or it's the leadership, right? It's the ones that are driven, that have clear goals. And in the end, what they found was it's all about psychological safety. That when you collaborate and you're in a team, people that are on that team need to feel safe. They need to know that they can express themselves and feel heard. And if they actually deliver the bad news or they say something that's a little risky, that's okay, that's safe to do. So empathy creates connection, and when people feel heard and feel connected, and it allows for very effective teams because it creates psychological safety. So what is it? And I think obviously from the poll, you guys have a good handle on it. It's the ability to experience and understand what others feel while maintaining a clear discernment about your own and the other person's feelings. I would say it's often misunderstood. It's not psychologizing. It's because of your mother you're doing that. No, that makes, when someone expresses a feeling and you dismiss it that way, that's not empathy. And I think one of the biggest barriers to empathy is feeling like you have to agree, that empathy is about agreeing with people. And in fact, the opposite is true. Because if you've created a really safe environment where there's trust and people feel heard, in fact, if you have to actually disagree with them, or you have to tell them something that's hard to tell them, they'll actually have more trust. Actually know that that you have their best interests at heart, and they'll actually be able to hear, even if it's not what you want to hear, right? Even if it's something difficult. So from a brain perspective, when we see someone in pain, it's the same neural circuitry in our brains that's activated, just like pain. We do like a brain tango. It's as if we are experiencing the pain itself. And, empathy relies on the same part of the brain as self-awareness, actually. Before I move on, I wanted to say one more comment around this idea of agreeing. And in fact, you don't have to agree, that you can disagree with someone, and the importance of it for empathy and building trust in your teams. So self-awareness is this movement from autopilot to aware. And empathy is then moving from awareness of self to awareness of others. So mindfulness training then can support empathy. So this is a micro practice, and it's again one that you can do in the moment. I think it's really, really helpful, especially right now as we go out and our post-COVID world evolves and we're running into different situations, people wearing masks, people not wearing masks, or there's some people that are protesting and others aren't protesting, whatever it might be, wherever the difference might be. It's particularly useful when you're not able to feel empathy for someone, even for the 67% of you that think you have it just right. I think this is a useful practice. So how it works is similar to the 3 breaths practice. On the first breath, you use it to settle the mind, let that snow globe, let the mind settle. On the second breath, you see a similarity. You're thinking this to yourself, and it could be as simple as, oh, that person lives in the valley, right? Or that person works for the same organization as I do. But you find a similarity, regardless of the differences you might feel. And on the third, before you speak a word, before you say anything, especially if it's a difficult situation, you offer kindness. You offer, I wish them well. Whatever it might be, you do this in your mind on 3 breaths. So I want you to think of someone right now, maybe someone who you don't know very well, or maybe someone who is a little bit challenging. And I want you to see them right in front of you, okay? So see them right in front of you, and let's do this practice. Okay, so take 3 breaths and do the shift to connection practice. I hope that was worthwhile. We'll come back to this. Let's just shift gears a little bit and explore empathy through a listening exercise. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it, and I really want you to speak. You'll be unmuted and share with everyone, but everyone needs to be speaking. I'll ring a bell when it's time to stop sharing. Okay? So here's the question. What's something you're noticing in your life right now? What's something you're noticing in your life right now? Joe, please unmute us. And let's hear everyone's voice. Well, right now I am noticing, let me hear you, I can't hear you. Everyone start talking. What are you noocing? Right now I'm noticing that, gee, life is hard as we enter into COVID right now. It really is. I'm
Entrenched views on
struggling to know what to do with people when
and
I
they're
want
not
to do it.
listening to one another. And in fact, most
Yeah,
of
it's
the time
just
they're
really
kind
not
of
that easy to
insulting.
listen. It's really, really
I don't
hard.
know how
Yeah.
you get through to that, especially if you have.
You were able to speak or not. Tell me, even in that little 10 seconds when everyone was talking and no one was listening to you, how did that feel? I know for myself, it made me feel distraught a little bit because I wanted to talk about how I'm feeling right now. Any other reactions to how it felt?
Frustrating.
Frustrating. You were self-conscious, yeah. Yeah, it's a little strange, especially to be, not being listened to.
Also like
And
waiting for a time to talk, but there's never that time.
Right. No time to talk. No one's listening. Unimportant. Yeah. And often we're not listening. We don't realize we're not listening. And we're not giving the full attention. So let's go on to a mindful listening exercise now. And we are going to go into breakout rooms. Let me look at my time. Okay. So this is how it's going to work. It will be a monologue. You'll break out into you'll be broken out into rooms. You'll be with one other person. If you happen to have two people at home with you as you're listening to this, you'll have three. And it will be a monologue. There'll be an A and a B. Person A will have the full stage and will talk for 2 minutes about a topic, and person B will give the gift of full attention, listening and nodding, giving indication that you're listening, but not speaking, just using your eye contact, your gestures to know so that A can know you're listening. Then I'll ring a bell. You'll switch. Actually, you won't hear the bell. You'll get a notification. It's time to switch. And then B will have the stage and A will listen. And after 2 minutes, you'll get another notification. And if it's just the two of you, you do a meta conversation. You just talk about kind of what it was like to be fully heard and not to actually speak and respond at all. And then you'll come back into the breakout room. A will be the person that woke up the earliest. So, and then when you do first get into that breakout room, just introduce yourself, say your name, and then begin. So just to recap, A talks and B listens. We won't have a bell, you'll have a notification. You'll switch roles, take a breath. B talks, A listens. And the third part for 2 minutes of free flow conversation. If you have 3 people, then C will get the stage. And here are the questions. They will be in the chat as well. What's surprising to me lately in my life is the kind of person I want to be is, or whatever else is on your mind. So let's go into the chat now. Go ahead, Joe, and take us into the chat. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Let's take a couple comments. If anyone is, I'm hoping some participants would like to share. What did you notice from that exercise, the mindful listening exercise? And if you would, just go on and click on the participant and raise your hand. Would anyone be willing to share? What was that exercise like for you? whether you were A or B. Claire, can you unmute Andrew?
Okay, yes, Andrew's unmuted now.
Hi, Andrew. How
Hello.
was that?
I thought it was neat going in knowing that I'd just be listening for 2 minutes was comforting, knowing I didn't have to say anything. But then also being kind of just being able to spew a stream of consciousness without judgment and have it be heard was cool.
Yeah, a relief almost, right? Initially, when you just know you're just listening. Yeah, Andrew, that I agree. And then being able to know you're being listened to. Thank you. Yeah, really relief when you're just listening. And nothing, no other agenda. I'm glad that you enjoyed that, Andrew. Thank you. Looks like Lauren has raised her hand. Lauren, go
Go,
ahead.
Lauren.
Thank you. So the other thing I think also I noticed is we always get feedback immediately, that it almost feels like it's so much longer when someone is just listening to you and not talking, because you're waiting for a response. You're waiting for some kind of interaction, in a sense, that connection.
Yeah, so you're saying it felt like a long time to be talking?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And did you notice anything then when you were, speaking? Did you notice the words coming out a little bit more? How did it feel to know you were being fully listened to, in addition to, oh, it felt long?
I mean, it feels good. There's also kind of like that silence, and you feel like, okay, I can just have the floor and talk.
Yeah, it's a little uncomfortable too. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's something that we don't often settle in, right? We are waiting for that response, and oh my gosh, I got to get it in before they say something, right? And even that affects how we're speaking. Like, are we really fully present in speaking what we know we want to say when we're anticipating a response? So that affects actually even how we respond if we don't feel like we're being listened to. Does that make sense? Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Lauren. Anyone else? So this is a practice. I'm going to call it a practice, this mindful listening practice. And, I really used it a lot recently because I drove across the country with my son. I returned the other day, but it was 3 days in a car. And he's a great guy, but it was a lot of time in the car with him. And I really remember thinking, I'm just going to sit here and listen. And so it is a practice just really of listening and seeing what comes up, observing what comes up in you versus feeling like, oh, you have to respond, you have to have something to say. And instead, what happens when we listen like this at work, whether it's listening to a client, or working with a partner, or listening to a family member, we're able to start taking another person's perspective and really truly feeling with them and understanding where they are. And that allows us to better formulate a response, our response, because we really fully listened. When we fully listen, we're also bringing our attention right into the present moment, just right here, right now. When might this be useful? Might you put this in the chat for me? When might you use this mindful listening? How about during an argument? And Michael, I see what you have, why there's been a lot of looting. I would say that that's a really good time to try to understand what's behind that. I'm not saying, oh, there's something that's justified. You don't have to agree. But clearly that's how people have manifested something, some feeling. I don't know why the looting, but I think it is another opportunity for us to try to understand it. That doesn't say we agree with it. It's a perfect example of where we don't have to agree, but it is useful to understand what happened there. And Claire, thank you. Yeah, when someone is upset, it's hard to do, right? Especially if they're upset at us. But what is it? What is it that's happening there? With a friend in need? Yeah, any conversation. Imagine if we could do this. Yeah, +1 for any conversation, Chris. Yeah. It's a regular practice. And I would challenge you, like today, as you go out, really see if every conversation you're mindfully listening. Give it a go. In a conflict and when listening, and also when you're on a team and listening to others. I will say it's been a pleasure working with the Vail Symposium and the Vail Valley Partnership at getting this together. Claire and Joe and Lauren and Chris, amazing listeners. So thank you so much for these comments and for the participation. So I think the biggest takeaway here, and especially as we go out into this post-COVID world and we're wearing our face masks and we have to social distance, I would say it's even more important here to pause, settle your mind, and listen. And you're going to have to listen. Sometimes it's hard to hear through the masks or at a distance, but just bring yourself right to the moment and remember how it feels to connect with others regardless of our social distancing. The other piece is remember to discern. Use equanimity. Someone might have feelings that you're not relating to. Notice them. You don't have to become them. You don't have to take them on. But you do need to notice them so that you can take their perspective and understand, so that you can formulate the right response. So notice, watch your thoughts, use equanimity. I think it's the best word, especially for right now, equanimity. Really not just right now, for always, frankly. And listening. Listening will allow you to validate what's going on with yourself and what's going on with others. So when you're able to really, the potential here is when we're moving off of autopilot and becoming more self-aware, it allows us to become aware of others and to fuel the connection. So the practices that we covered today are 3 breaths, right? That's the one to settle your mind and ask yourself, what's most important now? Mindful breathing practice, our focused attention practice, that's a sitting practice. Again, even 3 minutes, be kind to yourself. Mindful listening, it is a practice. And go out into the world and do that today. Really bring that into your life. And then the shift to connection and offering kindness. That's again in the moment where you take a breath, you find a similarity, and you offer kindness before your response. These practices allow you to find that space between stimulus and response, right? And when you find that space, then you're able to show up in who you know you are to be, aligned with what you care about most and how you want to be as a leader in our world, in our communities, because we all are leaders. So we need emotional intelligence skills. We need empathy and self-awareness for this VUCA world. And mindfulness is the movement from autopilot to aware. And awareness of ourselves helps us create awareness of others, creates connection and empathy. So I hope you can find some ways to practice one of these practices, if not all of them. And what I'd really love you to do now is just put in the chat, just choose one out of those 4 practices. Which one do you want to start with? Put in the chat, which one do you want to start with? The 3 breaths practice? Maybe you want to try it out sometime on a cushion. Which one? Mindful listening. Perfect, thank you. Offering kindness. We can never do that enough. 3 breaths. Thank you, Katie. Yeah. Mindful listening. Thanks, Chris. So before we go back to work or into your day, let's just take a minute to close. And I'm going to just tell you let me look at my time, tell you really briefly about, before we do this, there's one other practice. It's called a minute to arrive. So instead of 3 breaths, if you're gathering with people and there's a lot of science on a minute to arrive, and that is where you come together even before a phone call, or you've gotten on a phone call, you've had a busy day, you could say to that person, hey, I've just had a crazy day. Let's just take a minute and just breathe, take a few breaths before we start our conversation. It allows people just to ground themselves. So that's an additional practice, a minute to arrive. And there's science around the effectiveness of this. Starting every meeting this way. Imagine what your meetings would be like. Imagine what your conversations would be like if you took a minute to arrive. So we'll take a minute to close now. So find a comfortable position with your feet firmly on the ground. And bring your attention to your breath, the gentle in and out breath. Just breathing at your own pace, noticing the in-breath, the slight pause, and the out-breath with a slight pause. And as we go out into our work, into our offices, back out into the world, let's bring a sense of gratitude. Gratitude for taking the time to focus on this self-awareness and empathy practices. Gratitude for those around us and those loving and supporting us. Gratitude for one another. Thank you so much for being here today and for trying this out on Zoom, an interactive workshop on empathy and self-awareness. If you have any comments, let me know. Feel free to reach out anytime. I'm Amy Quinn with The Traveling Time. I am a travel advisor and experiential travel, but I do the inner and the outer journey. So thanks so much. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Lauren, for inviting me today.
Amy, thank you so much. It's been great. And Lauren, thanks for working with us at the Vail Symposium. It's always great to partner with the Vail Valley Partnership. And I hope you all will join us next week for How Ideas Happen. And that'll be an evening program at 6 o'clock next Thursday. And you can visit our website, vailsymposium.org, for more information. Thank you, Amy. And thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you. Oh.